Throughout history, humanity has wrestled with the question, what is the good life? One of the most provocative answers to that question comes from the school of hedonism, the belief that pleasure is the highest good. And while this idea has taken many forms over the centuries, one of the most refined and misunderstood interpretations came from the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus. Today, we live in a world that loudly and unapologetically chases pleasure, from luxury lifestyles to instant gratification through technology. But is this modern pursuit of pleasure what Epicurus had in mind? Or have we twisted the philosophy of hedonism into something unrecognizable? Let us explore. Understanding hedonism and Epicurean philosophy. At its core, hedonism is the ethical theory that pleasure and happiness are the only things inherently valuable. Pain and suffering, by contrast, are inherently bad and to be avoided. However, Epicurus, writing in the 4th century BCE, introduced a much deeper and more sophisticated form of hedonism than what we see represented today. His school, known as the Garden, offered a radical retreat from both political life and the intense austerity of his Stoic contemporaries. But Epicurus's version of pleasure was not about indulgence, excess, or hedonistic feasting. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Epicurus taught that the highest pleasures were simple, moderate, and grounded in the absence of pain, both physical and mental. He argued that the key to happiness was not in acquiring more, but in desiring less. To quote Epicurus, "If you wish to be rich, do not add to your money, but subtract from your desires." He broke down pleasure into two main categories: kinetic pleasures, which involve active stimulation, like eating when hungry, drinking when thirsty, sex, etc. Katastematic pleasures, the more stable, enduring state of peace and tranquility, ataraxia, free from fear, anxiety, or pain. For Epicurus, the latter was the true goal of life. He avoided politics, fame, and luxury. He ate simple meals and surrounded himself with close friends. His idea of pleasure was peace of mind, a calm soul, free from the fear of death and the anxiety of unfulfilled desires. Misinterpretation of Epicureanism. Over time, the word Epicurean became a synonym for indulgence, fine wine, rich food, and lavish living. This is ironic because Epicurus himself warned against these very things. He believed that indulgence often led to pain, addiction, dependency, disappointment, and inner unrest. He wrote, "The wealth required by nature is limited and is easy to procure, but the wealth required by vain ideals extends to infinity." So how did we get here? The shift likely comes from a misreading of Epicurean texts and an overemphasis on the word pleasure. In Roman society, as wealth and decadence grew, Epicurean ideas were co-opted to justify luxurious living. The deep philosophical foundations were traded for shallow justification of appetites. And in many ways, this distortion continues today. Hedonism in today's society. We live in an era of hyper-hedonism, a world where the pursuit of pleasure is often seen as the ultimate aim of life. Whether it's binge-watching Netflix for hours to escape reality, scrolling social media for dopamine hits, engaging in hookup culture in search of fleeting connection, buying things we don't need to impress people we don't like, using substances, screens, or sugar as an escape from discomfort. Modern society mirrors the kinetic pleasure-seeking that Epicurus warned against. We've built a culture addicted to stimulation. We've normalized overindulgence. And ironically, in our pursuit of pleasure, many of us are more anxious, depressed, and restless than ever before. Social media creates constant comparison. Fast food leaves us unfulfilled. Materialism promises happiness, but rarely delivers. And in our search for more, we rarely stop to ask, is this truly making us happy? The Epicurean answer would be no, because what we are seeking is not pleasure, but distraction. We are trying to numb the pain, not remove its causes. Epicurus would argue that true pleasure comes not from consumption, but from clarity, from the removal of anxiety, from understanding our desires, and from building a life grounded in simplicity, community, and inner peace. What Epicurus can teach us today. In a world driven by algorithmic desire, Epicurus invites us to slow down, to pause, to rethink what it means to live well. Here are a few timeless lessons we can draw from his philosophy. Limit your desires. Happiness is not about having everything, but about wanting less. Learn to enjoy the simple things, a walk in the sun, a meal with loved ones, deep conversation. Cultivate meaningful friendships. Epicurus believed that friendship was one of the greatest sources of pleasure. In contrast to today's obsession with followers and likes, he prioritized a small circle of trusted relationships. Do not fear death. One of the most radical aspects of Epicurean thought was that death is nothing to us. It is simply the end of sensation. Freeing ourselves from the fear of death, he believed, frees us to live fully. Seek tranquility, not stimulation. Peace of mind, ataraxia, is more pleasurable in the long run than any fleeting thrill. Meditation, reflection, philosophy, and discipline lead to a deeper, lasting joy. Avoid politics and drama. Epicurus warned against getting entangled in public affairs, as they often brought more stress than satisfaction. He chose the quiet life. While this might not suit everyone, the broader point is to guard your peace from unnecessary chaos. The garden today. Imagine a modern garden, not a place of excess, but a sanctuary from the noise. A space where people live simply, think deeply, and pursue real, lasting happiness. Epicurean hedonism is not about doing whatever feels good in the moment. It is about calibrating your desires, understanding your nature, and choosing wisely. It's a blueprint for happiness that is shockingly relevant in our overstimulated age. As we scroll, consume, and chase, perhaps we need to ask ourselves, are we truly living, or just distracting ourselves from the silence? Epicurus would tell us, pleasure is the beginning and the end of the blessed life, but not all pleasures are worth pursuing. In a world obsessed with pleasure, we must learn the difference between what feels good and what is good. That distinction may just be the key to a life well lived. Power, pleasure, and the modern Machiavellian. A hedonism of control. When we think of hedonism, we often think of indulgence, the pursuit of sensual pleasure, luxury, or excess. But there is another kind of hedonism, one that is colder, sharper, and more calculating. A form of pleasure not found in wine, sex, or song, but in dominion, mastery, and control. This is the Machiavellian pursuit of pleasure. While Niccolò Machiavelli is rarely grouped with traditional hedonist thinkers like Epicurus or Aristippus, his understanding of human nature unveils a more modern form of pleasure-seeking, one driven not by appetite, but by ambition. His work, The Prince, written in the 16th century, outlines a chilling but insightful truth, that human beings are inherently self-interested, and that the wise man, the prince, must manipulate, deceive, and dominate in order to survive and thrive. But this is not sadism or cruelty for its own sake. This is pleasure through power. And in today's world, where power often equates to influence, wealth, status, and social capital, Machiavelli's brand of hedonism is more alive than ever. Machiavelli's view of human nature. To understand Machiavellian hedonism, we must begin with his view of mankind. Men are ungrateful, fickle, hypocritical, fearful of danger, and covetous of gain. The Prince Machiavelli saw the world not as it should be, but as it is. He stripped away the illusions of idealism and morality to expose the brutal truth of human behavior. People are driven by self-interest. They will support you when it suits them, betray you when it doesn't. And because of this, a ruler, or anyone who wishes to succeed, must play the game with strategy, not sentiment. He advised that it is better to be feared than loved if one cannot be both. Why? Because fear is a more reliable tool of control. Love is fickle, fear is dependable. He advised lying if necessary, appearing virtuous while doing whatever it takes behind the scenes, and using morality only when it serves your goal. This is not hedonism in the Epicurean sense. It is not about inner peace, but it is about pleasure. The pleasure of winning, of surviving, of being in control of one's fate. It is a political and psychological hedonism, where joy is extracted from outcomes, not principles. Hedonism of the strong, power as pleasure. In Machiavelli's world, power is the ultimate pleasure, not in the abstract, but in its practical application, the ability to shape events, control people, and bend reality to your will. Consider this in contrast to traditional hedonism. Epicureans sought to escape pain by avoiding politics, avoiding risk. Machiavelli embraced the opposite, embraced the chaos, but learned to dominate it. In today's world, we see this everywhere. The corporate executive who builds an empire not out of love for the product, but for the thrill of dominance. The social media influencer who curates an image not for connection, but for control of perception and monetization. The politician who cloaks self-interest in rhetoric while maneuvering through power plays behind closed doors. The tech mogul who doesn't just want wealth, he wants to change the world on his terms. This is the modern Machiavellian, a power seeker dressed in the clothes of charisma, innovation, or progress. Pleasure here isn't found in peace, it's found in ascendancy. The ends justify the means in today's society. One of Machiavelli's most infamous ideas is that the ends justify the means. In today's world, this logic is not just accepted, it's celebrated. We admire those who do what it takes to succeed. The startup founder who sacrifices sleep, friendships, and ethics for the IPO. The athlete who bends the rules to win gold. The artist who sells out for mainstream success. The influencer who builds an audience through controversy and manipulation. They all feed on a Machiavellian diet of instrumental pleasure. They pursue not pleasure for its own sake, but as a byproduct of ambition fulfilled. And society rewards them. Wealth is admired, even if gained unethically. Fame is idolized, even when built on scandal. Power is respected, even when maintained by fear or deceit. This reveals a deep truth. Our culture is Machiavellian at its core, even when it pretends to be moral or egalitarian. The moral crisis of strategic hedonism. But this pursuit is not without cost. Just as Machiavelli warns that power is hard to keep, today's pleasure through power often results in burnout, isolation, and existential emptiness. Because Machiavellian hedonism requires masks, it demands deception, it teaches people to manipulate rather than love, to use others rather than serve them, to dominate rather than unite. And while this might win in the short term, it corrodes the soul over time. The modern power seeker often finds themselves surrounded by people who fear them but don't love them, followers who admire the image, but not the person's success that brings external validation, but internal disconnection. Just like Machiavelli's prince, today's high achievers may rule kingdoms but live in emotional exile. The pleasure of power is real, but fleeting and often lonely. A final reflection: is there a better way? Machiavelli did not write The Prince as an idealist. He wrote it as a realist. He gave us a mirror, not a map. He didn't say that ruthlessness was good, but that it was necessary in a world like this. But what if the world didn't have to be this way? What if true pleasure, sustainable, meaningful, whole, lies somewhere between Epicurus and Machiavelli? What if we could pursue excellence, mastery, and even power, but with integrity, compassion, and inner peace? That would be a new hedonism, one where pleasure comes not just from what we acquire, but from who we become. My audiobook, Becoming Interceptor, will cover this topic as well as others in extreme depth. Over an hour of the divine knowledge, from years of pain discipline, and learning to destroy and rebuild when necessary, all together in one book for my most true crusaders. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We are growing faster than expected. Machiavelli understood human nature with unflinching honesty. He saw that we are driven by fear, ambition, and desire. He taught us how to win in a world of wolves, not by being a sheep, but by becoming a fox and a lion. His legacy is a cold kind of hedonism, the pleasure of dominance, the joy of strategy, the thrill of control. And in today's society, where image is currency and power is the new pleasure, Machiavelli's shadow looms large. But the question remains, in a world where everyone is playing the game, what's the cost of winning? And more importantly, is that the kind of pleasure worth living for? Thus remember, we are Indeceptor.